Now that we know how we can self-host our Katana-based OWIN pipeline, I guess it's time to have a look at how we can test things in the OWIN pipeline. And to do that, I'm going to add a new project to my solution. I'm going to choose test and then unit test project. And I'm going to name it pluralsight.owin.demo.tests. And the first thing I'm going to do in here is add a reference to my OWIN hosting project. And then I'm going to rename that auto-generated unit test 1 class to OWIN tests. And finally, I'm going to modify that test method 1 method and make it async and return a task. And I'm going to rename it to OWIN underscore returns underscore 200 underscore on underscore request underscore to underscore root. So you can read out OWIN returns 200 on request to root. With that in place, it's time to go to NuGet and get hold of the package that contains the host that we want to use. In this case, that's microsoft.owin.testing. And since we just created a new project, we need to make sure that the package manager installs it in the correct project. And just as with the self-host NuGet package, we get a README text file with all the information that we need to know. So let's just go ahead and copy that code and paste it into our test. And to get that test server class to register properly, we need to add a using statement to microsoft.owin.testing. And since we've already got a startup class that we want to test, I don't want to use this dynamically generated OWIN pipeline. So I'm just going to remove that delegate and add a generic parameter of the type startup instead. And instead of adding an extra using statement for the HTTP response message, I'm just going to convert it into a var. And finally, I just need to do an assert.requal and compare http status code.ok with response.statuscode. And then it's just a matter of running the test to see if it passes. And look at that. Not completely unexpectedly, it passed. And since I seem to be on a roll with my test, I think I'm going to add one more. So I'm just going to copy the test I have and rename it to OWIN returns hello world on request to root. In this test, I want to make sure that the content returned from the server is the string hello world. So I need to get hold of the returned content. I do that by using the response.content.read as string async. And I need to make sure that I await that as well. And finally, I need to change my assert to compare the content to the string hello world. So let's see if that works. And there we have it, 2 passing tests. But there's one more thing I want to test. I want to make sure that it returns the correct content type when I request an image. So I'm just going to copy that last test method and rename it to OWIN returns correct content type on request to JPEG. And in this case, I need to request /sven.jpg and not just slash. And instead of looking at the content that was returned from the server, I want to have a look at the content type. And I can access that through the response.content.headers.contenttype.mediatype. And finally, I need to modify my assert to compare the content type to image/JPEG. So let's see if that works as well. And it did. But there's one thing I want to fix in here. One of the most important tenets in software development is dry. Don't repeat yourself. And to be perfectly honest, these tests are far from dry. So I just want to fix that. And I'm going to do it with a helper method with some generic goodness. I'm going to start off copying the last of my tests as a template. Next, I'm going to make it private. I'm going to change it to return task of t. And I'm going to rename it to call server of t. And finally, it's going to take a single parameter of the type func of HTTP client and task of t. And I'm just going to name that parameter callback. And that's the signature of my new method done. So all I need to do now is modify what's happening inside that using statement to return the awaited result of that callback method. And with my helper in place, I can go ahead and modify my existing tests. I'm going to start out with the OWIN returns correct content type on request to JPEG. I'm going to go ahead and get the content type by awaiting a call to call server and passing in an asynchronous delegate to the callback parameter. inside the delegate, I'm going to get the response by awaiting the x.getAsync, requesting /sven.jpg, and then I'm going to return response.content.headers.contentType.mediaType. And finally, I'm going to copy the assert I used to have and remove the old code. So let's see if it works. And it did. All tests are still green. So all I need to do now is make sure that the rest of the tests get updated as well. So I'm just going to copy that working call to the call server method. Then I'm going to rename the variable to body and change the getAsync call to go to /. And finally, I'm going to return the awaited response.content.readAsString instead of the media type. And finally, I'm just going to copy the assert as well and remove the old code. And for that last test, I'm going to do pretty much the same thing. I'm going to copy the call to the call server method. Then I'm going to rename the variable to status code. And I'm going to return the response.statusCode instead of the content. And finally, once again, I'm going to copy the assert and remove the old code. That should do it. So let's just try and run the tests one more time to make sure that everything still works as it should. And it does.